What would you say to somebody who's watching this show and is saying, you know what, I go to Mass and I want all of this transformation that they're talking about, but I'm certainly not feeling it?
It's not so much a function of feeling it as a function of the will to do it. And the beginning of that is understanding what we ought to be doing. So I can go to Mass and I can be passive and not being very attentive, and I'm going to get very little out of it. Or I can go to Mass with the attitude, I'm going to surrender myself totally with Christ as He's offering Himself to the Father, and that makes a huge difference. So the result, Lisa, if you're there passively, then you hear people say, well, I get very little out of the Mass. Well, that's probably true, because they put very little into the Mass.
Now, Jimmy, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, I really want some good teaching, and I really want a good homily. I want to be uplifted. And if they go and they don't hear a message that they feel uplifts them, that they can really pay attention to, then they say, okay, I got nothing out of it. I wasn't fed. How do you respond to that?
Well, the essence of the Mass and the focal point of the Mass is not the sermon. Now, we ought to have great preaching. It ought to be inspired. It should be enthusiastic, and it should challenge us to commit our lives to Christ. But that's one little piece of the Mass. The essence of the Mass is not what the priest does, that is, the man who's at the altar. It's what Jesus, the high priest, is doing in and behind the Mass, who's at the altar. So it's the action of Jesus that really matters. And that's what we must be participating in. And that's what transforms us.
How do you inspire that in children and in teenagers?
Well, first of all, we as parents must understand what's going on at the Mass. If we don't understand the parts and what's going on, for example, why does every Mass begin with a procession? Well, that must mean something. It's because it's a reminder to us that we are on a pilgrimage, that earth is not our destiny, heaven is. And the priest who's processing to the altar, whether it's from the sanctuary or from the back of the church, is reminding us that Jesus is leading us to paradise, that that's our home, and that's what it's all about. So right away, the procession which begins the Mass tells us, it helps us focus on what's really critical and important in our life. Now, children need to understand that, but I need to understand that as a father. And if I understand that as a father, and I'm aware of that as the procession is going to the altar, then I can teach that to my children. And what parents ought to be doing when the children are younger is explaining different parts of the Mass to them so they will be able to participate and understand what's going on at the altar. Secondly, when children are small, they shouldn't be sitting in the back of church, because the only thing they're going to see in the back of church are backs. So children should be up front where they can see what's going on in the altar. They can see the activity, what's going on, and then we can explain it.